So today I have the great pleasure of talking with Chef Charlie Palmer, who is the author of many cookbooks and the creator and owner of many more restaurants, and was named by the James Beard Foundation the best chef in America in, I think, 97, right? 1997 or so?
It was a few years ago. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Date myself.
Well,
Yeah.
welcome, Charlie, and thank you for speaking with us today. Of course, it is Share and Pair Sundays month, and I was thinking about you this morning and thinking how your name has increasingly been associated with steak. I mean, I know you from Oriole, from New York in the very old days, but what is it about steak that either you love to cook or you think Americans love to eat?
Well, I mean, I got involved in steakhouses specifically, probably 20 plus years ago. But when I think about, a steakhouse and what that means to the dining public, really, it's different than it was, many, many years ago. And I think I always look at like a steakhouse as like a modern American restaurant,
Mm,
not just red meat. And that approach it certainly involves like sourcing really incredible cuts of meat and cuts of beef specifically. um and of course then there's that always that association of red wine and beef, and Cabernet in particular, but other red wines too. And I think that is, kind of an American thing, an American tradition in a lot of ways. But
yeah.
we've always been in all of our steakhouses, in all of our restaurants, always, always thinking of it as part of what we do, not the entire thing.
Mm, mm.
I think it's important, whether you're in New York or you're in Napa, California, or if you're, in Las Vegas or Reno, Nevada, that you have to offer guests a lot wider variety, but also like anywhere we go, it's all about artisanal and sourcing what's local there, that kind of.
Yeah. I guess I was thinking too, though, that a steakhouse, it wasn't only, and I'm thinking about some of the great old steakhouses in New York, it wasn't only steak and whatever else they offered,
Mhm.
but there was an American way of the restaurant. The feeling in the restaurant was always
Yes,
very American versus you remember when we lived in New York, a lot of the great restaurants were French, and that atmosphere was very different than steakhouse atmosphere.
sure. Sure. Well, you have the steakhouses that still exist, like Peter Luger's and the what I call the traditional or Smith and Wollensky, that kind of steakhouse. Um, and you're right. From the service side of things, in some ways it was almost like rude sometimes the way it's like, here's your steak, and don't ask for anything more kind of thing. Um, but I think, also, from the idea of a steakhouse to most people is not so much about just red meat. It's a way of dining, right? So you
Yes.
can you can order what you want to eat from a protein standpoint, and then you could decide on your own, how that what goes with it, accompaniments. Is that if I feel like eating three different types of potatoes or pasta, whatever, I can do that, or I can have three different green vegetables because I want to try to pretend I'm healthy that day, that kind of thing. And I think that's one of the attractions for a lot of people is that you can dine and you can eat exactly what you want,
Yeah.
eat
It,
not having composed dishes that the chef has spent a lot of time figuring out. It's a fillet of sea bass over a bed of couscous with three different sauces and two garnishes, and it's a composed plate that some people always like, oh, that's what I want. I love that. And there's a lot of people that say, like, no, I want to eat. How many times, even in our higher end restaurants, we get people like, I'd just love to have a simply prepared grilled piece of fish, with some steamed asparagus and no sauce, just a drizzle of olive oil, that kind of thing.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can have that with a steakhouse concept.
Yeah. And I've often thought that that is how cravings work. I mean, nobody wakes up in the morning and says to themselves, I have this incredible craving for branzino with potato crusts and a little pistachio sauce on the plate. Right? People wake up and say, I'm going to make some lamb chops tonight, or I'm in the mood for oysters. People have cravings are usually very direct and very simple.
Yes.
Um, which leads me to ask you, in thinking, of course, the whole spring, I've been thinking a lot about wine and food because of Share and Pair Sundays. And I was thinking this morning, wine and food, of course, do more than give us calories. They're kind of essential to the human spirit. And you watch people enjoying themselves in a restaurant where you realize not everybody in that restaurant is an expert on food or wine for that matter, but that idea of, you're feeling really good. You don't even know what's happening to you sometimes. It's kind of
Mhm.
like the magic of food and wine to be so spiritually nourishing, I guess is the word I want to say.
Yeah, and I think, that's why we, have kind of carried with this theme of, you know, genuine hospitality
Mm,
because as you say, like a lot of people, the just the act of dining out is an event for them, and as a chef, I'd like to believe that it's always about the food and only about the food, and that's why a guest is coming there because they want to eat delicious food and and enjoy that. But in reality, a lot of people are coming to a restaurant because they're well taken care of and they're welcome to that restaurant and they feel special, right? And the other thing about it is, dining today, as it's always been, but maybe even more, it's about getting together and sharing,
mm,
sharing something together. And yes, it's dinner and it's wine and it's, great cocktails and things like that. But it's like sharing somebody else's company, you know. And we look at it always a lot of times in New York, it's like it's a dinner business, but there's more, there's more, deals being made in restaurants than there are like on Capitol Hill, for instance. There's more deals being made, in any, restaurant that we've had than any boardroom that exists. A lot of it comes with
right.
like if if you can make people feel comfortable, if you make them feel good, if you can, you know, give them food that's delicious, and that all adds to like an enjoyment level. That's what we're trying to do in a restaurant. It's not just about the food, and
Yeah. I was talking to Lydia Bastianich about this very thing, and she was saying, why do you think so many business deals are done in restaurants? It's because when you share food with people and when people eat food, you can watch them in a restaurant. They become progressively more open
sure,
and more open not only to what they're eating and drinking, but open to each other. So it's actually the perfect environment in which to do a business deal.
yes, yes, and meeting people. It's easier to meet
Yeah.
someone you don't know, and whatever for whatever reason that is, over a really nice meal, and a great glass of wine and all that, than it is meeting them in a space that doesn't have all these other things that make them feel good, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a hugely important part of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are, of course, a chef, a food guy, but you're also a wine guy. Here you make this Pinot Noir from the Russian River Valley, famous in California for its Pinots. And that reminded me that I wanted to share with you this story that a few years ago, I did an article in which I asked 50 people this question. Do chefs know more about wine than winemakers know about food, or do winemakers know more about food than chefs know about wine? Just that question. So it was fascinating. First of all, everybody had an immediate answer. And I asked some very well-known people. I mean, Julia Child was alive then. I asked her. I asked Bob Mondavi. I asked David Bouley, who is a chef in New York, who I'm sure you know.
Mhm.
And he said, there was a pause on the line, and he said, Karen, that is a ridiculous question. And I said, why is that? And he said, because if you care about flavor, what difference does it make if it's solid or liquid in your mouth? And I thought, oh, thank you. So beautifully said, right? That there really aren't wine people and food people in two separate silos. Hopefully not. There are people who love flavor, and they should love flavor wherever they find great flavor.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. I mean, I'm asked a lot, like why, because I'm involved in the process of making wine, right? And I own vineyard and, grow grapes, grow the Pinot that goes into that wine or some of it. And people are always, a lot of people ask me, a lot of wine people ask me, like, well, how did you get so immersed in wine? But I can go back to the days of my first restaurant or even at the River Cafe that I've always had an interest in wine, maybe more so than a lot of chefs. And I know a lot of chefs that are, very knowledgeable about wine. I don't know a lot of them that have said, like, I'm going to plant vineyard and grow grapes and actually make wine because
Right.
that was a dream of mine, right? And Clay Morrison and his dad, Tom Morrison, helped make that come true. And with the Charlie Clay this is our 18th vintage. We just released on Sunday at the Passport, which is a thing that happens in the Dry Creek Valley. And, this
Yeah.
is Russian River, but it's made at, the winery in Dry Creek. But, for me as a chef, it's always been that there really isn't a great meal or a great dish without a pairing of a great wine.
Yeah.
And that sounds like, well, everybody says that, but I really believe that. I really believe that if you're able to pair a wine with a great dish, that both the great dish can be great on its own, the wine can be great on its own, but together it lifts both of them up amazingly. It can make something that's like really, really special with that pairing, and we've taken that, over the years to the highest levels we you can imagine. Like with my partnership with Bricoleur, for instance, it's one of the few wineries that are able to do what I call a very elaborate pairing, I'm saying, but it's a pairing that goes way beyond like a piece of cheese with this wine. It's a crafted dish paired first and foremost with each of the wines that are being featured. So when you look at like it's called the rooted tasting, there's 6 different wines featured, and my job and Todd's job and Tomat's, the people that are involved in it, from the culinary side, our job is to understand the wine first, because once
Mhm.
that wine is in the bottle, it's not going to change, right? It can get better, it can age, whatever. But as a chef, I can go in the kitchen, we can say, okay, what on the palate, what can we do? What dish can we create that really complements this wine? And we can tweak it, we can adjust it, we can add a little bit of seasoning or salt or acid or whatever it is, and really craft something that is the perfect pairing with each one of those wines. And I just think that's like amazing that, we have the opportunity to do something like that, and not everyone, but, a lot of the people that have this tasting, they really understand what's gone into it. And it really does make this wine, shows this wine in the very best light it could possibly be.
Mm.
So, yeah. And,
Yeah.
it's just one of the things. And it's one of the things I've learned, spending a lot of my time in the wine country is, there are those, you are able to do those kind of things, and there's a huge appreciation for it from the guest or the customer base.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, part of the reason for me that I loved moving to wine country, I'm in Napa, is you on a day-to-day basis, you're surrounded by people um, who love nature, who love food, who love wine, and who love the combination of all of those. Um, yeah. Did you always have a good palate, even as a child?
I'd like to think so, I don't know if that's
Excuse me.
true. But I always had a love for food, and, I think it's as you just said, if you love taste, you know, but there's things that, I don't think taste good, there's wines that I don't think really taste good, but, they're few and far between, I have to say.
I usually ask people about a food or a wine they love, but I want to really ask you, what food do you hate? I'm just curious.
What food do I hate? I think it's more of a generalization. Like I don't appreciate things that I think are like overspiced
Oh,
because and people will disagree for sure. But I think if you have so much heat on the palate,
mm,
that really kind of what's the true essence of that, right? Like what are you really tasting? Are you tasting just that Fresno chili that's like so intensely hot that,
yeah,
um, you're not tasting the food or whatever it is,
right, right.
and you're not tasting the wine that because it just it kills your palate.
Oh, completely.
So,
Yeah.
things like that. But and there's certain herbs that I think that I completely don't work with, especially with pairings, like cilantro. Like is an herb that I think destroys any wine pairing.
Oh,
Works with it from the most part. There could be something out there like, yeah, that works, or that kind of thing. But I think I don't know, and I don't know why it is. Like it's just that the essence of that and what it does to your palate, and then you
yeah.
whatever wine with it, it kind of like it doesn't work for me.
There is one wine that works with cilantro. I think it's called Bud Light.
Bud Light, yeah.
Uh,
I was gonna say
yeah,
draft any IPA probably works better with
yeah,
cilantro.
yeah, exactly. I'm always I guess I'm kind of two minds. I know what you're saying, and I too can sometimes sit back in a restaurant and be like, "Oh my God, that was like 1 + 1 = 3" as a food and wine pairing. But I also think that sometimes it's equally important to pair wine to mood, not just food.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And when you're in the mood for something, that's a strong drive. And it's hard when someone's in the mood for something, I would never try to convince them not to have what they're in the mood for.
Hmm. Yeah, I've spent recently we've my wife and I, Lisa, have been spending time in Champagne because I've become very, I don't fascinated is not the word, but like I really want to understand making sparkling wine, making champagne and stuff like that. And we it came about not not the fact that I really like a lot of champagne and different sparkling wines, but a few years ago I was introduced, or probably 10 years ago, I was introduced to Chateau Palmer, or not Chateau Palmer, Champagne Palmer,
Hummer.
right?
Hmm.
Which I'd never knew about. And they came to me in New York. I think it was in New York. And I was like, hey, would you taste these wines? And would taste these different champagnes and stuff like. I was like, well, wait a minute, I've never heard of Champagne Palmer, that house before. So understanding that and really getting more interested in it, and they're fantastic wines, by the way, is, I said, what would it take for me to actually come to Champagne and create a cuvee of my own? Which, I can say after after 7 years, we actually have the wine here, and it's amazing. But it's all the most amazing part of it is that I really understand what everything that went into it, the blend of the different vintages. And I learned so much doing it that, like for instance, I never really understood that to be a Blanc de Noir had to be all red skin grape. You
Hmm.
know, that anything made in Champagne has to go on the lees for at least 24 months, things like that. Uh,
Right.
but the complexity that comes with this wine, for instance, it was on the lees for almost 4 years, with that second fermentation in the bottle, really changed, the whole dynamic of the wine, in a way in a really great way, and the complexity and the levels and the creaminess and everything about it. So, it was just something again that, I love understanding, how things are made and what goes into it. And
But
it's
I
been
think you've just put your finger on one of the differences between making wine and making really interesting, good food, which is you can continue to play with food until you get it right, right? You're tasting along, you're thinking, this needs a little more cumin or whatever you think, right? You're tasting as you go. And at some point you say, there it is, everything came into balance here. Now this dish is ready. But with champagne or great sparkling wine, you kind of put it to bed. And then 4 years later, 3 years later, you're like, when you can't fix it anymore, you're like, whew,
right.
okay.
The only thing you can do then is like it's not ready to be disgorged. Leave it on the leaves longer, right? So,
Right.
which
Oh
is
my,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
But getting
Well,
back to that when you were talking about pairing, when you're in Champagne, they can the people that live and work and make champagne, obviously, they can explain to you why champagne goes with every single food you could possibly imagine, right? Or a different
yeah,
style of champagne, whatever. But it is honestly true. Like this Blanc de Noir, for instance, it's a great wine, even with like a roast chicken, which you don't think
sure.
that, but it's big
Yeah.
enough, it's creamy enough, it's got enough body, it carries itself well, and of course the acidity is always there, so yeah.
I drink a glass of champagne every night of my life, and I have for 20 years.
Mhm.
I consider it the perfect demarcation of day to night is a glass of champagne.
It's a good point.
And yeah, and being Irish, chicken and mashed potatoes and champagne have been eaten in my kitchen many times
Oh
because
yeah.
it's like the go-to for anyone Irish, I suppose. And of course, you have to have potatoes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, Charlie, it's been really great talking with you. Thank you so much for all the great work you do in every field, every culinary and gastronomic field, wine, food, cookbook writing, restaurant creation. You're a multi-talented guy. So thank you so much for talking with me. And thanks for supporting Share and Pair Sundays too. Really appreciate
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. Really, really appreciate it.
it. Good to
And
talk
great to
with
see
you.
you.